Thank you so much, Wayne, for that introduction, and thank you all for coming. In October, Wayne sent me an email asking, "I wonder what you think of this." He included a link to a 2-minute video.
Excuse me, everyone. Can I ask you to listen to me for a minute, please? I have a little girl. She was very abused for her entire life. She was terrified. She has a very determined look in her eyes wherever she goes. And she was hurt and abused her entire life because of this establishment and because of establishments like it. She was locked away. She was...
After watching just a bit of it, I paused the video and emailed him back. "I'm 30 seconds in," I said, "and I hate it." The video continues much as it started, with activist Kelly Atlas tearfully sharing the story of a hen named Snow, who was rescued from an egg farm, and imploring diners to think about Snow every time they're eating meat or eggs.
She had nobody there for her. She was crying. She was scared every single moment. And because her usefulness had run out, she was going to be killed. Someone was going to murder her. And I can see you smiling, and I can see you laughing, but to her this is not funny. I went in there with other humans, and I took her out of there. And if I hadn't, she wouldn't be with me right now. She would be gone, just like all of her sisters, just like everybody who we left behind. And I'm here to tell you today that all of those other girls and everyone who we left behind, they just wanted to live too, and they deserve their lives. And right now their eggs and their milk and their bodies are on plates inside this restaurant, and that is so unfair to them. My little girl's name is Snow, and every time you see someone eating somebody else's eggs or somebody else's body, you are going to remember her name. Her name is Snow. She's a beautiful little girl, and she just wants to live. This isn't food. It's violence. It's not food. It's violence. Please think of her name every time you see somebody's body on a plate. Her name is Snow, and she just wants to live. Thank you.
The video went viral, surprisingly garnering the attention of Glenn Beck, CNN Headline News, the local CBS affiliate, and numerous other press outlets. The most surprising coverage of all, however, to me at least, was a piece published on Truthout defending Kelly's protest, written by me. So why my sudden shift from cringing at Kelly's behavior to being a vocal defender of her protest? When I first watched the video, I wanted to keep my distance from it. I wanted DXE to keep its distance. I wanted the entire animal rights movement to have nothing to do with this emotional woman and her caricature of animal rights activism. It made me very uncomfortable. But as I watched the press coverage and read the comments, I felt a different, deeper, and much more disturbing kind of discomfort. There were the predictable jabs at Kelly for being overly passionate, crazed, even mentally unhinged. There were the equally unsurprising comments mocking the very idea that what is happening to animals is violent and wrong. If the activists are to be believed, said one, then violence tastes goddamn delicious. In another, a photo of chicken parts on a grill is accompanied by a caption that reads, "These are Snow's sisters who got left behind. Don't they look delicious?" And yet another, "I'm going to remember Snow's name later tonight when I barbecue some chicken." Finally, there are the restaurant patrons, shown in the video calmly eating animals and laughing at Kelly. And then I realized, I identified more with them than I did with Kelly. People eating animals and laughing at violence seemed more appropriate than this woman passionately articulating my deepest values. Remaining calm in the face of injustice made more sense than this woman who was very upset about it, even though I happen to be a woman who was very upset about it. And I had the same reaction they did. Be quiet, Kelly, don't do this. Leave these people alone. And that was much more unsettling to me than Kelly's protest. It was the kind of discomfort that arises when you know that you are taking comfort in the crowd, even though what the crowd is doing is wrong. So I gave it a lot of thought, and I realized that I had internalized social norms that consciously I reject. Not only norms that tell us we shouldn't get too emotional, whatever that means, but also norms that tell us that times and places where people are actively participating in violence against animals are not when and where we should protest. Norms that say we should not disrupt lunch, not disrupt the idea that animals are food, not disrupt the social pact that says we cannot speak of atrocities if it is to say that average, good-hearted people are perpetuating them. It is a terribly difficult thing to see our own biases. But when I thought critically about it, I realized that even if Kelly's approach was not my cup of tea, my impulse to tamp it down, to squelch out her protest, was much more problematic. A few weeks ago, I was reminded that the fundamental provocation here is not Kelly's emotional behavior, but the issue she is emotional about. That to focus on her emotionality, to dismiss protesters because their chosen methods are somehow too disruptive of polite society, is to deflect attention from the issue they are protesting, to distract from injustice in order to focus on civility. A colleague of mine sent an all-staff email encouraging folks to eat leftovers from a meeting that had been held in our office the night before. The steak and chicken are in the fridge on the right, so please eat it up, she wrote. Grilled vegetables are in the same fridge on a plate covered with foil. I hit reply all. Before you help yourself to the former, I said, remember, those were individuals like Melody, now living at Vine Sanctuary, who wanted to live their lives. I included a link to Melody's story on the Vine webpage. The response was swift and squelching. One colleague chastised me for, quote, imposing my views and judging people for their dietary choices. A director tried to keep the calm, urging that we not have discussions about politics and values on all-staff email, asking that when something touches a nerve, we please take the time to walk down the hall and talk in person. A handful of my colleagues supported me, but I know that many objected to my email. Of course, my office at the Center for Constitutional Rights is a place where we talk constantly on all-staff email about politics and values. It is a place where we understand why there shall be no peace until there is justice, where we know that change is turbulent and messy and often makes people uncomfortable, where speaking truth to power includes challenging the power of dominant and often unconscious ideas. But it is also a place where when I expressed a view that my colleagues do not share, when the power I questioned was values they hold, I was viewed by many as having acted improperly. What I found most notable in this situation was how provocative my email was. I did not protest. I did not yell. I did not interrupt anyone. And at least until I saw the responses of my colleagues, I did not cry. In all the ways that Kelly's protest was criticized, my email was its polar opposite. And yet the result was the same. My email was deemed inappropriate. In having said something publicly, rather than treating the issue as a private matter about my personal feelings, I was perceived as disrespectful. In having said downright politely, think of where this comes from, I was deemed rude. And not just by those who eat animals. The person who criticized me for judging others' food choices is nearly vegan. And when I have shared this story with longtime animal rights activists, they have become wide-eyed, a bit stunned to hear that I did this. Both the reaction to Kelly's protest and the email exchange at my office are examples of the use of civility to distract from and discredit the idea of animal liberation. Both followed a pattern recently described by the American Association of University Professors in its report on the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign's firing of Professor Stephen Salida over his personal tweets criticizing Israel's bombing of Gaza last summer. The AAUP wrote, "The notion of civility is consistently operates to constitute relations of power. Moreover, it is always the powerful who determine its meaning, a meaning that serves to delegitimize the words and actions of those to whom it is applied. Challenges to normative beliefs, in other words, are deemed uncivil, whatever the tonality of their delivery." We have all felt the inhibition of civility, the twinge of wanting to speak up in a grocery line, at a family meal, in social justice spaces where everyone seems to get the things we care about, except the animal issues. And often we have bit our tongues because of the pit in our stomachs, and because we fear we will do more harm than good. We will be seen as eccentric, perceived as impolite, the rights of animals written off as the province of crazies. At the same time, we understand when minimum wage workers disrupt the workday by walking off the job to demand higher pay. We get it when Code Pink disrupts congressional war hearings. And Black Lives Matter demonstrators do not seem out of place when they are blocking highways, protesting in train stations and department stores, or walking into fancy restaurants and disrupting brunch, because racism is everywhere, and it is in everything. To those committed to social justice, these actions do not seem crazy or out of place, and we don't really care if they are deemed by others as impolite, because the alternative to them is the persistence, the festering of injustice. So the job of the animal rights movement, when our fellow activists, our communities, or our society tell us that it is inappropriate to speak up when and where people are actively participating in violence against animals, is not to fall silent. Our job is not to go elsewhere. It is not to conform to these norms, but to defy and thereby transform them. It is true that refusing to eat with someone because they are eating animals, or saying something to a stranger in a grocery line about the individual in their basket, or walking into a restaurant that serves animals and protesting, or sending an email to your entire office saying, "Think of where this comes from." These are indeed perceived as bizarre and rude. But this is not because these actions are wrong, nor is it because they are inherently ineffectual. Indeed, it is hard to imagine how we can ever achieve animal liberation unless and until we protest and object when people are engaging in exactly the atrocity we are trying to stop. Rather, it is because at present these actions are largely unintelligible. The animal rights movement has yet to create a social context that gives these actions the meaning they must have in order to do their work. I believe this is our movement's most urgent job, to create public activity that makes sense of isolated protests and private admonishments, to bring diverse efforts for animals together under a single umbrella that insists they have a right to live their lives, to animate a narrative that changes the meaning of these actions from improper impositions of personal views to legitimate protests against what are truly improper impositions of personal views, violence against sentient individuals because we want to eat them, or wear them, or experiment on them. At one point during Kelly's protest, she says to the restaurant patrons, "I can see you smiling, and I can see you laughing, but to Snow this is not funny." Kelly tells them that every animal who was left behind when Snow was rescued just wanted to live too, and they deserve their lives. And when people are being rational, instead of rationalizing, it is easy to see that this is the more sensible view. It is only a story that tells us otherwise. Only a story that has made laughing at these statements, laughing at these deaths, seem acceptable. and the animal rights movement can tell a different story by acting out a new one. I believe that DXC is doing this. It is saying that it is long past time for the animal rights movement to show that this is not about a few bad apples. It is not fundamentally about cruelty. It is not about so-called animal abuse that is somehow extraordinary. Rather, it is about stopping violence that is downright ordinary. DXC is creating a platform in a community where people who want to stop violence against animals can do more than shop for vegan products, where they feel empowered to speak up for animals, where their impulse to say this is violence and it is not okay is nurtured and supported rather than stifled about concerns over civility. DXC is pointing to the elephant in the room, that all of the vegan products inside of Whole Foods do not cancel out all of the murdered animals inside of Whole Foods, that adding sofritas to Chipotle's assembly line does not cancel out the carnitas right next to it, and that adding vegan products to grocery stores and restaurant chains nationwide most definitely does not cancel out the Orwellian story that more and more corporations are telling, the one that insists slaughter can be a humane thing. In its very short life, DXC has helped to change the story of the animal rights movement, to show that this can be a protest movement, not merely a consumer movement, and that we really can say what we mean. I will share just a few examples. DXC activist Glenn Alexander was quoted in an article about Hillary Clinton's campaign trail stop at a Chipotle. There is nothing ethical about animal agriculture, he said. To support the humane or compassionate exploitation of other beings' bodies is to look for the right way to do the wrong thing. Amelia Tamayo, a member of the DXC-inspired group Teen Animal Rights Activists of Massachusetts, explained that speciesism is the idea that different is lesser. When covering protests at Whole Foods, press outlets have drawn directly from a video of DXC's investigation and open rescue at a Whole Foods egg supplier. One article quoted Brian Burns saying, "Whole Foods is taking over America, not just with stores, but with ideas. With the idea that you can somehow care about animals, but kill them too." 14-year-old Julia Carpenter in Massachusetts has been eminently quotable in several stories. "We don't want bigger cages," she told one press outlet. "We want the cages to be empty." "I believe there is no humane way to kill an animal who does not want to die," she told another. "We want to make people aware that the humane treatment companies like Whole Foods promote is a myth." These are exactly the sort of things animal rights activists should be saying every time we have an opportunity to speak up for animals. This is exactly the narrative that should be emanating from our movement. Our job is to say these things at every opportunity and in every forum we can until the intrinsic logic of this message clicks. It is also worth looking at the kinds of responses this narrative provokes. Whole Foods says of protests against it, "These activists are not fighting for animal welfare, but rather for an end to animal consumption altogether." I say, and our movement should say, exactly. This is the debate we should be having. No longer a debate between factory farming and animal welfare, but one between animal welfare and animal liberation. It is time to shift the fault lines. As we saw with the response to the video of Kelly's protest, not all reactions to this message will be as diplomatic as Whole Foods. Here's my favorite example. "Personally," one writer wrote, "I think anyone who values animals over or equal to people is to be both pitied and backed away from slowly. This is not to say vegans and vegetarians. I have no issue with anyone choosing to eat however they want, and there's nothing inherently good or bad about being a meat eater or a vegan or a vegetarian. As well, factory farming is a really shitty practice, and the way we do agribusiness hurts not only the economy and the environment, but smaller farmers. It's a process that badly needs to change, and I can totally get behind any criticism of factory farming. Kelly Atlas and her Loon Brigade, however, aren't protesting simple factory farming. They're protesting the entire concept of eating animals, which, nope, bye. Animals aren't people, and if you feel like judging me for eating them, I'm going to laugh at you. I've thought long and hard about how I would have reacted if I'd been one of those customers, and I've come to the conclusion that it almost certainly involves me shouting, "Excuse me, garçon. I will have also the veal and any foie gras you have on hand." To those of you provoking these sorts of reactions, I say do not be discouraged and do not be dissuaded. To judge our effectiveness based on the immediate reactions of those who accept ideas we are challenging is to misunderstand how conceptual change, a necessary component of any social change, happens. If this is how those who wish to defend eating animals want to frame the debate, by all means let them. Let us provoke more of it. Let it all come out. Let that be how eating animals is defined. And in the long run, we will see which side of the debate is more appealing to most people and which ideas prevail. Thank you.